So we are actually going to stop at 9:45, so I want to get started as soon as we can. Being Presbyterians, everyone is late. My name is Hugh Hewitt, and I know many of you, but some of you I don't. And welcome. My friend Don Barkley has been a member of Irvine Presbyterian Church for how many years now? 13. And I know that the pastor, Scott Bullock, is standing over here. So for those of you who don't know Scott and wish to talk to him afterwards, he'll be leading worship at 10 o'clock. And everyone, of course, welcome to stay. How many are visitors to Irvine Presbyterian Church? Oh, well, thank you. Welcome. I hope that over the course of 6 weeks, Don and I are going to encourage people to bring your friends who are either unchurched or differently churched and just take a basic apologetics course, which is what Don is skilled at. I am not now, nor have I ever been a theologian or an apologist, but I'm a good asker of questions. And so I thought the first thing we would do is have Don explain a little bit about who he is, what he does, and why I asked him to do Ask a Christian and where we got this idea from. So Don, why don't we start with that background?
Well, good, thanks, Hugh, and welcome to all of you. We love having a lot of diversity here. I'm used to that in the ministry that I'm in. I would tell my kids when they would say, what do we say when people ask Dad, what does your daddy do? One quick answer would be, well, you know, there are ministers who minister to people who go to church. Well, my daddy ministers to people who don't go to church. Because so much of what we do is in places where people are kind of kicking the tires of faith or Christianity in particular. And so I belong to a ministry called Search Ministries. It came out of another ministry called Young Life about 37 years ago. And it's very relational. We are the entree in our, I guess, in our bag of ways to do this is what we call an open forum series, which happens usually in homes or businesses. It's a diverse group. People invite people from all different belief systems and traditions, and I or someone serves as a moderator. We start with food, we end with dessert, and for an hour we talk about things like life and God and the meaning of life and what happens when you die. And I'm not the Bible answer man in that, I'm more the moderator, but when people want to know, then I'll say, I will give you what I see to be, I'll give you my perspective, which is what I see, traditional, generic Christian perspective, just as an option for you to consider. So it's a fun thing. We do a lot of asking questions ourselves, and often we get a chance to tell our point of view and give our 2 cents. So that's Search Ministries.
And what we're going to do, and I would encourage each of you, if you have a friend in your life who has got questions and wants to go to a non-churchy setting to actually find out what it is people in church do, to bring them. We can always add more chairs. We've got plenty more chairs. And if there's anyone who is absolutely distanced from the church because of controversy or injury or skepticism, again, Don is really one of the best people I know at this. And we also, for those of you who don't want to invite anyone, hope to model through what Don does, how to talk to people about, those of you who do believe that in Christianity, how to talk about Jesus in a way that is perhaps effective in a modern church culture. But a little bit more biography. Too many people know too much about me. I only be talking about myself on the air. But Don, where were you born?
Wyoming, Casper, Wyoming. Do you know anybody from Wyoming? That's right. So I was raised there, mostly there. There was a time where I moved around the country. My dad worked for government contract organizations like Martin Marietta, et cetera. But he was basically an educator. My parents were teachers. And so I ended in high school in Laramie, Wyoming, which is 2,000 feet higher than Denver with wind. And that was a bad place for a tennis player to be. So I just kind of knew it wouldn't be long before I end up in Southern California. And but biographically, that's my stomping grounds.
And we have a very tenuous connection, which goes back to the fact that Don and his wonderful wife Ann helped my brother-in-law Dan Wallum rent an apartment in Casper, Wyoming 1,000 years ago. And so it's pretty funny that we're doing this together. And let's walk from Wyoming. Where did you go after that?
Well, I went then to a community college in Colorado for 2 years to play tennis. I didn't have a lot of ambition, I just liked to play tennis. And I was there for a couple of years. I didn't know what I was going to do after that. I worked at a guest ranch in Colorado. It was during those days in my spiritual saga that I moved from kind of being an agnostic existentialist, I guess is what I was, to a believer in Christ. And so I ended up at Wheaton College, finished there, and worked at a church then for 3 years back in Wyoming, my home city. And got the bug to know more about that stuff, so that's when I went to seminary, and that's where we met Search Ministries.
And when did you meet Ann?
I met Ann at Wheaton. We don't remember when we met. Which is odd, isn't it? So it wasn't
actually, Betsy said that about you.
So I actually remember her before she remembers me. She was a pianist, and we ended up having mutual friends. Our first date was the Indy 500. We said, you can't talk very well in case you've ever been there, in front of the pits at the Indy 500. But the race was rained out that year, and so while they were drawing the track, we got to know each other better.
And so after you two were married and you have a wonderful family, which you can tell people about, in fact, why don't you?
We do have a wonderful family. We have 3 boys, 3 sons and a daughter. Taylor's 27, works in Washington, D.C. Twin sons who finished at Wheaton Conservatory of Music, working in the entertainment industry. One is there, wave your hand, Camden, back there. And then a daughter that we adopted. We were foster parents and then adopted her when she was 2 years old. And she's 20 now, lives in Riverside.
And so all through this time, what year did you join Search Ministries?
1985, January 85. A little bit of background on that, I think I mentioned this to you, Hugh, before, is the reason we ended up with Search Ministries because they had a game plan, a plan of work, of talking to people that was nothing like I'd ever heard. There's a saying that says, there are 2 reasons why people don't become Christians. The first is that they don't know any Christians. The second is that they do. And I was one of those second kind. I was an arrogant non-Christian. I became an arrogant Christian, and pushed my family away. I was not trying to be around. And Search Ministries came along and said, you know what? Jesus wasn't like that. My wife, during the seminary days, was a piano bar singer, and played the piano and sang at hotels in the Dallas area when we were there for 4 or 5 years. And we ended up being there 5 years. She played in hotels and then ended up playing at the Ritz-Carlton here for 18 years and singing. Well, in that, we met a lot of people, and we got to know people. And Search Ministries was a whole different methodology. Listening, dialogue, not manipulative monologues, but non-manipulative dialogues. And so that's what caught our eye, and that's what we've been trying to bring to Southern California too.
So you've been faithful to this for 28 years, and most parachurch workers don't last that long, do they?
There's a revolving door in a lot of these ministries, that's true.
And so in the course, another irony, I have spent the weekend with 3 friends in Los Angeles and drove down this morning. And one of them had actually had Don, said is coming down to do a first of 6 classes with Don Barkley of Search Ministries. And my friend Jan said, Don did that in my basement 15 years ago. And so just so people understand how you approach this, would you maybe use that as an example of what you have been doing for 28 years?
Well, Jan's was typical. I think the atypical part was the unusual setting. Jan is a Montana fly fisherman, and he decked out his basement like if you were taken down blindfolded, didn't know where you would think you would be in a Montana lodge. Beautiful stone, huge fireplace, and a saloon bar over on the side, and big, huge, rough-hewn logs as the walls. Other than that, this was a typical open forum series where we start with a group of folks that invite a bigger group, And the best groups are, 40 people and more. And I think there were probably 60 or 70 people at Jan's house. And the idea is to have as much diversity there as possible. Though our desire, of course, is to, I tell people, I wish people would agree with me about everything. Don't you? But that's not our job. Our job is to get conversation going, make places where people can talk about significant issues in a stimulating, fun way. And so that one was 4 weeks. We had 4 discussions. People would come. We'd have food before, and the people would come, and then I would start then we'd gather in this Montana Lodge type family room area. And I would say there are 3 ground rules. The first ground rule is that it's a discussion, not a lecture. You can talk about anything you want. Is there meaning to life? Does God exist? Why is there evil and suffering? Anything you want to talk about. We'll go for 59 minutes and 50 seconds. So I'm going to set my timer for an hour right now. And then as people have given their points of view, there may be times when I'll share my 2 cents. And I'll give my perspective just as an option to consider. So I'll not only be moderator at times, I'll give some input. But the more disagreement, the better. We welcome it. It makes it more fun. It makes it more interesting. And if we walk away saying, that was interesting. Maybe you can talk about politics and religion in polite society and get away with it. Then mission accomplished. So we did that. We did that 4 weeks. The group actually grew in number. People started inviting their friends. People who were invited invite their friends. And many people will walk away and say, I've never been in a setting where I can express my spiritual opinion and have anybody want to listen. And often they'll say, especially have a Christian want to listen. Ooh, that kind of hurts. So that's the kind of success we want. If people never change their mind, but they've had a great time thinking about this, then that's our goal.
And that's what we're going to do for the next 6 weeks. And promptly at 25 after, so it gives me only 10 more minutes, we're going to say if anyone has a question or a comment, the microphone is here. Now we videotape this, and I believe Irvine Presbyterian Church is going to put it up on its website, so
we will.
To other people.
Right.
You can come. I made a particular note. We didn't open in prayer, and we're not going to close in prayer. This is not a standard deal. This is really to reach out to people who might not otherwise come. But the prayer will begin at 10 o'clock across the venue. And please bring or direct your unchurched friends to the videotape series so that they can see how absolutely, winsome is not a word that's associated with me very often, but it is a word that is often associated with Don. And Don is quite winsome as he talks about who Jesus is. And we have a young journalist student here, and I've just done something that's terrible in our business. It's called burying the lead, which is you set it up and you bury the most important part of the story deep into the story. So for the next 10 minutes is sort of the intro to this class before we open the microphone. And we will wrap up at 45 minutes after the hour. These are 45-minute classes. They're short bursts. Who is this Jesus?
Well, I would think about this. We do have a topic designated for each of these 6 in the series. And every time I tell you something, I'm going to tell you what I believe. I'm going to tell you from my perspective. And I always say this, I could be wrong. Some Christians are taken aback by that. Well, what do you mean you could be wrong? Well, because I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything. But I'll tell you what I believe. And I believe that Jesus is God visiting planet Earth. Some almost 2,000 years ago. And it sounds like an outlandish story. I didn't always believe this. But what Christians claim and what the scriptures teach is that Jesus was not just a teacher or wise sage, but was actually God, the Son of God. So having the essence of God, took on also the nature and essence of man. So having 2 natures, was able to visit the planet and not overwhelm us and accomplish the task of rescuing the human race from itself to have a relationship with God.
Can you do, for the benefit, and again, we live in a post-Christian culture, and a lot of people will have absolutely wrong ideas of the historical Jesus. So, do you want to run through that?
Yeah, one thing we have in common with historians, no matter what they believe, is they believe that history is a subject that's valid. let me give you, what I mean by that is, and I've been in conversations where people say, I don't believe in history. I say, okay, we're going to have to talk about history. Just tell me about your life. Where did you come from? And they begin to tell me their history. We tend to trust eyewitness accounts, and especially primary source accounts. Even if we had no New Testament, we would know a lot about Jesus of Nazareth. We would know from non-Christian historians. So if we had no Bible, no New Testament especially, New or Old Testament, but I say New Testament because that's where we think, well, that's where we find Jesus. But if we had no New Testament, we would know from authors like Tacitus, Suetonius, making mention, Josephus, those who didn't believe in Jesus, but who mention him as a historical character. We see evidence of him in other ways as well. And that's where I come from. When we talk about Jesus, we're not talking about someone like Frodo or Bilbo, who are characters in a very coherent story. But does that story correspond to reality? If my kids who love Lord of the Rings, I always ask them, so what's your favorite movie? And they say, you mean besides Lord of the Rings? If we could, we would go see Shire. We would go see the Shire. We would like to see the Misty Mountains. Let's do a Lord of the Rings tour. But you can't do that. Even though it's a coherent story internally, it doesn't correspond to reality externally. And what the Jesus story does is both. It's especially set in history, and it's told in a historical sort of genre. And to me, that's where the starting point is. That it's not, faith doesn't come from within. It comes first from seeing something trustworthy, something that you can put your faith in. Do I believe that Jesus really existed? How do I know that? I don't check inside. I investigate, just like I would check to see if there's a real Hugh Hewitt. I hear him on the radio. Does he really exist? Has anybody talked to him? Is there any record of him showing up and actually being someplace? And is he real? So that's probably a long answer to that, but history is the setting. History is the means also by where we can start to talk about who Jesus really was.
Now, I just, in preparing for this, I recently released a new book called The Happiest Life, which is somewhat autobiographical. And I realized that if I put anything in there that wasn't true, people would instantly know that it wasn't true. If I said, I was the closest lawyer to President Reagan in the White House. Well, I was a lawyer in the White House, but I was the junior briefcase-carrying, absolutely insignificant lawyer in the White House. And everyone who read that would know that was true. And about this historical Jesus, before we talk about his claims next week, and before we talk about Scripture next week, it's tested by the fact that a lot of people were around to witness these events.
They were, and the irony is this. It would seem that the further we get from an event, the less we would be sure about what happened, right? I hear this a lot. Is this happened 2,000 years ago? Something 4,000 years ago is we can have half the assurance that it happened. That's kind of how we kind of do the math that way. The opposite is actually true. It actually turns out to be counterintuitive, that we know much more about, we have better primary source material now about Jesus than we did 200 years ago. So we have, for instance, and I don't know if, can I just make a comment about this? In 1611, when the King James Version translators were commissioned by James I of England to have a new translation of the English Bible, the translators, excellent scholars, had 6 Greek manuscripts to work from, the oldest of which was about the 10th century AD. And fast forward, because that's all they had. Those are old materials. I mean, 900 AD, we don't have books on our shelves that last that long. 200 years after that, in the late 19th century, they had 2,500 or so Greek manuscripts to work from that dated back to about the 5th century. And so, as time passes, we have better and more early manuscripts. Now, when a translation is made, like the ESV made just a few years ago, nearly 6,000 Greek manuscripts that date back to the one that's, a fragment, undisputed fragment in the British Museum, in the British Library, called the John Rylands Papyrus, that's dated between 110 and 130 AD, and you can go see that. So no more can you say, well, maybe the stories about Jesus were written by people of the community of faith 100 years later. We have a reference point. We have a foot in the sand that says somebody was there, and that was just within 30 to 50 years of the contemporaries of the apostles themselves.
Now, when this is posted on the Irvine Presbyterian Church website, and I will tell people on my radio show if they wish to see the first one, to go and see it, they'll see the slogan of this church, which is disciples making disciples. So I also thought, as I looked at that website, that that is a good summary of what he did. But what would you say summarizes what Jesus did in his lifespan?
Well, basically, he came to accomplish something. He came not primarily as a teacher, though he was the wisest man that ever lived, I believe. He was a teacher. But he says that he didn't come to serve, but to be served, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So he came to accomplish something that was more than just to give information. He came to do something for us. And that the disciples didn't understand. Every time he said, I am going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to suffer, they're going to kill me, but 3 days I'm going to rise from the dead, they argued with him, they were confused, they didn't understand, they denied that. They didn't understand this mission. So whatever we say about Jesus, it wasn't that he was just a wise sage and a good man, or even a revolutionary. All of those things are true in some senses, but his main mission was to come and rescue humanity. And that's what we'll talk about more as we go forward. And the death for us by him is what Christians claim is the crux, the cross of the matter when we talk about Jesus.
Now, when Betsy and I had the chance to go to Israel a couple of summers ago, we went up to Galilee. Of course, Jerusalem is an undeniable reality, and if you go into the tunnels next to the Western Wall, you will go to the place next to the Holy of Holies. And I defy anyone who's actually been to the temple to say, this isn't a big deal, and the Old Testament is in any way to be doubted about what the role of the Jews in history is, because it's so. My friend Dennis Breger, with whom I do Ask a Jew, always makes this point, which is that the temple is this amazing physical manifestation of the Old Testament, which is overwhelming in its impact on people. But Jesus was a Jew at a particular time, and he moved around. He went up to a place called Capernaum, and he taught a lot in Capernaum. And we went to the ruins of the synagogue at Capernaum, and we kind of know where he went and where and what he did at those places, right, Don?
We do. In fact, I've been to Israel a couple times, and as Hugh experienced, the guides, which you probably experienced, if you probably had a professor or somebody who went along on the trip. Our first guide was one from Ben Gurion University. He was a Jewish man from New York, and who ended up moving his family to Jerusalem, taught as a professor of biblical history at Ben Gurion University in Jerusalem. And it was, for him, not a question as to whether the Bible was trustworthy historically. He had trouble with the miracle stuff and whether God exists, not that Gideon actually defeated the Midianites with a small corps of men, but that God helped him. That's what Jackie would have doubted. But he doubted nothing about the sites where it happened. Israel's a little tiny place. And the topography, including springs and mountains and rivers and all those things, are virtually the same as they were thousands of years ago. And so when the Bible describes something, you can pretty much find what you need. But we never saw any kind of doubt in his mind that what was described in the Bible in terms of its history was actually true.
Well, I had this second-rate guy whose name was Mark Roberts.
PhD from Harvard.
PhD from Harvard, undergraduate from Harvard. And if people really want to know about Jerusalem, the pastor of this church, Scott Bullock, I think lived there 2 years. Scott? How long? A year. And when Scott talks about Jerusalem, as I've talked with him about Jerusalem, it's really something that really confirms and, again, edifies. Now, before I open up the microphone, I really would encourage any question at all or any reaction at all. What's the worst reaction you've had when you have talked about Jesus in all these 25 plus years of ministry you've been doing?
Wow. Well, I've had angry people. Had one person say after my intro, he says, why are you trying to fix me? What do you mean? Christians are always trying to fix me, like there's something wrong with me. That was a hard way to start that discussion because they started with this emotional barrier right out of the blocks. And another guy once started by just using more cuss words to explain his hatred of God. And that was the first comment with a lot of anger and pretty loud. And one thing that I've learned is that you can find common ground in anything. And so after he ranted for a little while about how angry he was at God, I said, so you're not an atheist? What? So you're not an atheist, you believe in God and you're mad at him. And I believe in God and I've been mad at him too, so tell me why you're mad. Those are two that come to mind.
So why do people have that reaction?
The anger?
Yeah.
Good question. I think because life is painful, life is difficult, and God is in our minds the King of the universe. Even those who don't believe in God would still tend to define God as the one who made everything and is in charge of everything. And if He's good, then why does He allow bad stuff happen to me? Why? And especially when it involves the innocent or children. There's a lot of pain out there, and so I think that's something we don't, as Christians, say. Well, we don't understand that. No, we understand that too. We agree with you that it's difficult to understand how these pieces fit together. So I think a lot of it is life itself is hard, and then the second is that they've had bad experiences with Christendom or with Christians. They've met pushy, obnoxious, scandalous Christians sometimes. And so they're reeling emotionally from the experience. And the mind, just as the mind can't accept what the heart rejects, the mind can't accept what the gut is nauseated about. And when people have had bad experiences with the people that represent Christ, or are said to, then no wonder. We can literally say, if I'd had the experiences you've had with Christians, I wouldn't be a Christian either. If I believe what you believe about Christianity, I wouldn't be a Christian either. I think we can empathize with where they're coming from.
We have a joke in our house that after I go and serve myself dessert, I've got mine, and I don't really worry about everybody else. And so, that's so sad, I've got mine, or I've got mine. It's a joke. You've got yours. Right? You believe in Jesus, and so you've got yours. Why bother to tell other people about it? Why, in fact, if someone you know ought to come and watch this video or come to the other classes, why do you do that?
Great question. Because it's a good deal. It's an amazing thing. If it's true that God loves me more than I love myself, and has always loved me, and that He has indeed come to do what was necessary in order to restore me to Him, heal my brokenness, give me real joy and a purpose for this life and the next. If that's really true, then why wouldn't I want to tell people about that? If it's not true, then I'd like to know. And that's why I invite, if you find Jesus' body, I would like to be the first to know, please. But until that point, if this is really true, then it's really wonderful.
And if you now have a question, you can come up here and stand, and I'll make this one the kind of question that can go 10 minutes in the event you're all shy, but I know some of you and you're not shy. And I would welcome you to come up and stand up here. Jesus made disciples. What does that mean? Especially since the motto of Irvine Presbyterian Church is disciples making disciples. What does that mean?
Well, I think, it was a disciple meant somebody who follows and learns from. And we believe that Jesus is still at work. And that's back to the God part again, the God thing. That if He really was God, then He is still with us. And He said at the end of His ministry, "Lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age." That we can walk with Him and follow Him and learn to know His ways, follow His ways, and experience his love. To sort of follow him means to realize that I've got to follow something. I am following something. I'm either following myself, maybe I'm following a particular ideal path. And Jesus is saying, those may be antithetical or incompatible with following me. So it may be tough. It will be tough for all of us in some way, and some tougher than others. But he wants me to actually follow him. And it will be better for me. I may not be able to see, but it will be better for me to follow the one who knows me better than I know myself, knows what gives me joy better than I know what gives me joy myself. And that's I think what a follower of Jesus is. One who doesn't just say, I believe in him, but said, I want to walk, I want to really realize that he will be my teacher, my mentor, my guide, and my God.
Seeing no one at the microphone, I continue with questions. So if you want one, I'm not going to pause until I see someone there. So if you want to ask one, just come up. Christopher Hitchens is one of the world's most famous atheists, was a radio pal of mine, appeared on the show 70 times. Richard Dawkins has been on a couple of times, world's most antagonistic atheist going, other atheists that I've dealt with. When Dawkins was on my radio show, and he discovered that I was a Christian, he was disbelieving, because I had read his book and was very complimentary of some of his work. And he said, do you mean to tell me, that British accent which drips a sneer, do you mean to tell me that you really believe that Jesus Christ changed water into wine? Interesting that he would give this miracle. And I said, well, yes. And he said, do you really believe that? I said, yes. He said, really? 3 times. Thinking the reverse Peter. And I said, yes. And he said, my God. I said, no, my God. And I wish I had said, and that's like the D-level miracle. That's not even. That's right. So why are the opponents of Christianity so invested emotionally and relentlessly? I mean, this is your job, it's not my job, it's amusing and it actually makes great radio. But you have to ponder this. Why are they so invested in getting people not, or even to ask or to come and listen?
And wasn't it Richard Dawkins who helped to subsidize the signs on the double-decker buses in London that says God does not exist, etc.? So he's a campaigner for atheism like I have not heard. So
well, I don't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised by that in the least, actually.
I just read a quote by him, and I really agree with it. He said, to fellow atheists, he says, especially I think it was a group of college students, when a Christian says they believe that they believe in God or believe in Jesus, ask them, so what evidence do you have for that? And the implication was that'll stop them. Wow. Well, I just see that as a great open door. To your question, Hugh. The barriers that are inside us, I think there's a side of us that in a way would like to avoid the reality of God. I mean, I don't like to look at even people that I love in the eyeball face to face. It's uncomfortable. We are, have you ever tried that with somebody even that you love? Let's just stare at each other 6 inches to just look at each other. If I'm not comfortable with people, then what would it be like for the God of the universe to look me in the eye? There's a certain side of me that says, I'm scared of that with God. And especially if I believe that God has hurt me in some way, then I don't want to have anything to do with him. But there is that barrier, and I think it's a barrier of the will. I think the intellect kind of comes along, the emotional experiences we have is there. But I think when it comes right down to it, we're given this freedom to say no. And some people do that with a vengeance. And the little saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. There's a story of a man who was in an accident, a horrible accident, and he thought he was dead, and his family couldn't convince him otherwise. And so the psychologist, when interviewing him, said, so you really think you're dead? Let me ask you this, do you think dead men bleed? No, I don't think dead men bleed. No, they don't. And the psychologist took out a little pin, said, hold out your finger, and pricked his finger, and the man watched the blood come to the surface. He says, Well, I'll be darned, dead men do bleed. Okay, so we kind of tend to want to stick to our guns because it's who we are and it's comfortable, don't mess me up sort of thing, you know, and I think that's part of it too.
Okay, and the last question, and seeing none from the audience yet. By all means.
Good. David.
Thank you. Jesus comes on the scene 2,000 years ago, perhaps, and humanity has been on earth for many, many thousands of years prior to that. And all great societies have tremendous philosophic bases, heroes that emerge, noble people that emerge, and all of them identify, latch on, talk about a relationship with their God. So in the West we have Christianity, and I've had the blessing of being able to travel. So India, they have Hinduism, they're very noble, very devout, and in Asia, of course, all these faiths. Why can't we not participate with all these other historic faiths? What is it about Jesus so much? And can't I be in right relationship with God through Buddhism or all these people have not even, millions of them have not even heard the name Jesus?
Wow, light question, David. Thank you.
Ending on an upbeat, simple question.
Yes. A great question. One thing that and I think we do have a session kind of isolated especially for this, but let me just in summary, a couple points come to mind. One is all religions have some truth, but they don't always have the same project, the same goal. The Buddhists that I know, for instance, that they're about a Buddhist that would say talk about the way of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and that sort of thing. It's not about God. It's not about having a relationship with God. My Hindu friends, you know, there's a Hindu monastery in the canyon up here, Vedantic Society Monastery, and those swamis there, when we've been in discussion, will talk about God as it, and are very comfortable with that. God is impersonal. God is not someone you get to know. In fact, the essence of all is God. And we, like drops in the ocean, will someday sink into the great ocean of the all, of what we would call God, because we are the same essence as God. So in terms of it's not the same project for many people. It's not to know the Creator who made us. The distinctive, so that's one distinction, and as Christianity says, it's even distinct from the religions that believe that God is a separate and transcendent being, the Creator, like in Islam or Judaism. And that Christianity would say that instead of us climbing to God, God came down to us. He coming to us did something for us. And so Christianity is good news about what God has done for us, as opposed to good advice about, or good laws, or a good way to ascend to a relationship or favor or to heaven. And for that matter, Hinduism and Buddhism are also something that we do. So Christianity is unique in a big way, I think, that Christ comes and says, it's what I have done, what God has done for you. That's the news of Christianity. And when we talk about it in the, whatever, 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, we'll talk more about that. But that's that's an important question.
Thank you for that. 3 quick exit questions. First of all, if someone wants to send their friend to the website of this church, what is it?
Help me out here. irvinepress.org.
irvinepress.org.
Right.
If someone wants to find Search Ministries, how do they find that?
That's harder. Because one thing is we have a website. It's always changing because we want to be someone who is not going to. For instance, if I put up there Don Barkley, trained as an evangelist, and the guy that's going to go to lunch with me for the first time goes to that website, he's going to say, oh, I know what evangelists are like. I think I'm going to find something else to do that day. So we're very general. We have a very general website, We do have some, materials, but we're very relational. So you can find us. There's a presence there. Searchministries.org, I believe, right, Chung Lee? Chung Lee's my associate here in Orange County. So you can ask me too.
And then a final double-barrel 2-minute question, it's a pretty easy one. Do you doubt, and why should people who doubt inquire?
Oh my goodness. Those who don't doubt they think they know, and they really don't. I think everybody, for instance, I still wonder how the first evil came into the universe. I wonder about that. The doubt doesn't floor me. It doesn't keep me from believing. But I think belief has some doubt in it. There's a little bit of doubt. There's a man sitting in here, Bill, in a class, sat in a chair and it collapsed one day. It just collapsed. Remember that? It just collapsed. You all are putting your faith in a chair right now. Is it possible that your chair could collapse? Now it made you worried, right? You're all doubting. See, in the reality of life, we drive freeways and should doubt a little more. Life is a mixture of evidence and faith. And where there's that, there should be some a feeling like a little precarious. But when the evidence is so, to me, overwhelming, that it becomes harder to disbelieve, it takes more faith to not believe than to believe, then we make decisions on that basis. That's how we buy cars and buy houses and buy cell phones.
But why, if God is good, and He is, then why even bother doing this? Because you'll get the e-ticket to date myself at the end anyway.
Like the e-ticket to date yourself?
The e-ticket meaning I'm dating myself to a year when Disneyland.
Oh, I see.
No one, that's really dating myself.
I do remember the e-ticket.
Okay, the best ride. So you're going to get to go on the best ride anyway, right?
And so your question is what again?
Why worry? Why not spend Sunday reading the New York Times and jogging? Or pursuing the inquiry, because God is good and everyone's going to get there.
Oh, well, golly, that's a great question.
Or not.
I think part of it is I really am intrigued by people's questions, and I remember what it was to not believe, and I remember people coming into my life who cared about me and said, "Let's think and talk about this." And I guess I think I would sit and not maybe read another thing. I'm trying to picture that. Although the topic of God is pretty dang fascinating, but especially as people that I care about want to talk about these issues and they ask me questions that I haven't heard before, then that's very motivating to me. Ooh, I want to know more. So,
on that note, we hope those of you who are here come back. We hope this will inspire, whether you see it in person or on the video, to bring someone else. And we will be here for the next, we'll be here all week. That's what they say in Vegas, right? Now we'll be here every Sunday for an additional 5 Sundays at 9 o'clock for 45 minutes. And worship, for those of you who are inclined to attend or visiting, is at 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock over across the patio there. We'd love to have you. And thank you again for coming. And we do encourage you. This is not a Christian thing. This is a discussion, an open forum, and there are no questions that are too sensitive or that shouldn't be on the table. And the worst thing that can happen is I would tell you something that's not true, or you would, thinking that we really know, or that we would not have the answer. Well, welcome to the human race. We don't know all the answers, but invite people, and we would love to see them and see them next week.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Hugh.